The glass shattered before Elias Wren could finish breathing. A crystal cup struck the marble pillar behind him and burst into a bright spray of fragments, catching the cold chandelier light like scattered ice. No one in the hall moved. Even the servants stationed along the walls lowered their eyes at once, as though silence itself had become a law written by the man standing at the head of the room. Adrian Vale did not raise his voice. He never had to. "Say it again," he said. The old family advisor kneeling near the center of the hall pressed his forehead almost to the floor. His hands trembled over the open folder before him, where printed records, photographs, and intercepted messages had been arranged with careful cruelty. The East Wing access seal was used at 2:17 in the morning. Only 3 people possessed clearance. You, Master Vale, Commander Rowan, and Mr. Wren. A hush deepened. Elias stood beneath it, without expression. His white shirt was still damp at the collar from the rain outside. The thin fabric clung faintly to his shoulders, making him seem paler than usual, almost translucent under the chandelier. He had been summoned from the archive before he could change. Ink stained 2 of his fingers. A faint bruise, half hidden beneath his sleeve, had darkened during the walk here. Adrian saw all of it. Worse, Elias knew he saw it. That had always been Adrian's most frightening habit. His gaze never missed a weakness, a loose thread, a withheld breath, a heartbeat shifting too quickly beneath the skin. He could read a room the way executioners read necks. For 3 years, Elias had survived beside him by learning how to become unreadable. Tonight, even that was not enough. "You gave the Southern Port schedule to House Ward," Adrian said. The accusation landed without heat. And because there was no heat, it sounded final. Some of the betas in the room looked at Elias with something between pity and disgust. A few alphas stared as though waiting for him to kneel, to cry, to plead innocence in that soft Omega voice people always expected from him. Elias only lowered his eyes to the folder. The top photograph showed him entering the archive corridor 2 nights ago. The angle was poor, but the face was clear enough. His face, his access card, his figure disappearing into a place where he had, in fact, never gone. A perfect lie did not need to be beautiful. It only needed to arrive before the truth. "Who gave you these?" Elias asked. A small ripple passed through the hall. It was the first time he had spoken since being brought in, and his voice was calmer than it had any right to be. Adrian's fingers tightened once against the black jade ring on his thumb. "That is your defense?" Adrian asked, questioning the source. "No," Elias said. "I'm asking who wanted you to see them before asking me anything." For one brief moment, something moved behind Adrian's eyes. Not softness, never that. Perhaps memory, perhaps offense, perhaps the echo of all the nights Elias had stood 2 steps behind him in enemy negotiations, passing him silent warnings with nothing but a glance. Elias had never once misread danger. He had never once failed to protect Adrian's back. Then Lucien Ward stepped forward from the left side of the hall. He was not dressed like a traitor. Men like him rarely were. His grey suit was immaculate, his silver hair tied neatly at the nape, his features arranged in an expression of reluctant sorrow. As a beta, he carried no pheromone pressure, no instinctive dominance, no visible threat. That had always been his advantage. In the Vale household, where alphas broke doors and omegas were expected to break quietly, Lucien had mastered the gentler violence of suggestion. "Mr. Wren," Lucien said. No one wished to believe this, least of all Master Vale. Elias looked at him then. There was no hatred in his gaze. Hatred required freedom. What Elias felt was colder, older, and more careful. 3 hours earlier, a sealed note had been left under the door of his room. Say one word, and the child will not live long enough to have a name. No signature. No need for one. The paper still rested against his skin, tucked inside the inner pocket of his coat like a second pulse. Every breath reminded him it was there. Every silence widened around it. Adrian descended the steps from the head of the hall. His black coat moved with him like a shadow given command. The Vale family had produced generations of powerful alphas. But Adrian was something rarer and more dangerous, a man born with enough force to make obedience feel natural. When he stopped before Elias, the air between them tightened. Elias had once known that closeness differently. He remembered Adrian standing beside his sickbed last winter, refusing to leave even after the doctor said the fever had broken. He remembered waking at dawn to find a cup of warm water placed exactly where his hand would reach. He remembered Adrian saying, without looking at him, "Don't mistake this for concern," while adjusting the window because the draft had made Elias shiver. Small mercies, almost nothing, enough for a lonely person to ruin himself on. Adrian held out his hand. "Your access seal." Elias looked at the palm before him. Strong fingers. A thin scar across one knuckle from the night Elias had taken a blade meant for his throat and Adrian had crushed the attacker's wrist hard enough to break bone. Later, Adrian had told him he was foolish for stepping in. Later still, he had stood outside Elias's room for 2 hours without entering. Elias removed the silver access seal from his wrist. The clasp caught briefly. His fingers, already cold. Failed once before, he managed to loosen it. When the metal dropped into Adrian's palm, it made a small sound, almost delicate. It should not have hurt more than the accusation, but it did. "You won't investigate further?" Elias asked. Adrian's jaw shifted. "Do you still think you deserve that from me?" The hall became unbearably clear. The rain at the windows, the candle smoke bending near the ceiling, the scent of alpha dominance. Restrained, but present, pressing lightly against every breath. Beneath it all, Elias could smell the faint bitterness of his own fear. He suppressed it before anyone else could notice. Omega instincts were treacherous things. They urged surrender at the worst moments, begged for warmth from the hand that held the knife. His body, exhausted and newly strange, with the secret growing inside it, wanted to lean toward the alpha before him, wanted recognition, wanted safety. Elias gave it nothing. "I served you for 3 years, he said. Adrian's gaze dropped to his mouth, then returned to his eyes. "And sold me in one night." A servant near the door flinched. Rowan Vale, Adrian's cousin and commander of the private guard, stood rigid among the family members, his brows drawn low. He looked as though he wanted to speak, but Lucien's earlier testimony had cornered him too neatly. The forged access record implicated the command division as well. One wrong word from Rowan would look like self-protection. Elias understood. He had always understood too much. Lucien sighed softly. "The damage to the southern port can still be contained if we act before dawn. But sentiment has already cost us time." Sentiment. Elias almost smiled. In the Vale estate, sentiment was what people called loyalty when it became inconvenient. Adrian turned his head slightly. "Leave us." No one questioned him. Chairs moved. Shoes retreated across marble. The great hall emptied slowly. Reluctantly, every witness carrying away a different version of Elias's disgrace. Lucien was the last to go. As he passed Elias, he did not look at him, but his sleeve brushed Elias's hand. A whisper barely touched the air. "Wise boy." Then he was gone. The doors closed. The silence afterward was larger than the room. For several seconds, Adrian said nothing. Without an audience, the coldness around him changed texture. It did not soften. It became more dangerous because there was grief beneath it. Buried so deep even he might not recognize it by name. Why, he asked at last. The word was not loud. It entered Elias like a blade because it was the first thing Adrian had said all night that sounded almost human. Elias looked at the rain running down the tall windows. Beyond them, the garden lay black and silver. The old cypress trees bending under the storm. He wondered, absurdly, whether the child inside him could feel fear yet. Whether such a small, hidden life could inherit the shape of its parents' terror. "I have no answer you would believe," he said. Adrian stepped closer. "Try." There it was. The narrow bridge, the last fragile plank between them. Elias could cross it. He could tell Adrian about the note, about Lucien, about the missing archive page, about the strange nausea he had hidden for weeks and the physician's quiet confirmation that morning. He could say, "Your child exists. Your enemy knows. If you condemn me publicly, perhaps they will think I am no longer valuable enough to use." But Adrian had not asked whether he was afraid. Adrian had asked why. And somewhere between those two questions lay everything that had already broken. "Would you have believed me?" Elias asked quietly. "If I had spoken first?" Adrian's expression stilled. For the first time that night, Elias saw the wound under his anger. It was ugly because it was not only suspicion, it was disappointment. Adrian had trusted very few people in his life. And trust, for him, was never gentle. It was possession disguised as reliance. To be trusted by him was to be placed inside the iron circle of his world. To step outside it, even falsely, was to become an enemy. "You should have known better," Adrian said. Elias felt something in him go silent, not break. Breaking was noisy. This was quieter, like a lamp extinguished in a distant room. "Yes," he said, "I should have." Adrian's eyes darkened. "Do not make yourself the victim." "I am not making myself anything." "Then kneel." The word struck the room harder than the broken glass had. Elias looked at him. Adrian's face was carved from restraint. Perhaps he expected refusal. Perhaps he wanted it. Because refusal would be cleaner than this unbearable calm. If Elias fought, Adrian could answer with force. If Elias wept, he could dismiss it as manipulation. But Elias only stood there, pale and still, as though judgment had arrived late to a body already sentenced. Outside, thunder rolled over the estate. Elias lowered himself to his knees. The marble was cold even through the fabric of his trousers. His abdomen tightened faintly. Not pain exactly, but warning. He rested one hand against his thigh and forced his breathing to remain even. Adrian's pupils contracted. For an instant, he looked almost startled. Elias had kneeled before him many times in formal ceremonies, in family rites, in dangerous rooms where hierarchy was armor. Never like this. Never with the dignity of someone who had decided that humiliation could touch the body and still fail to reach the soul. "Enough," Adrian said sharply. Elias did not rise. "You asked?" he said. Adrian's pheromone pressure slipped. It was only for a heartbeat. But the air changed. Cheddar, frost, and the metallic edge of restrained violence flooded the space between them. Elias's body reacted before thought could stop it. His breath caught. Fingers curling slightly against the marble. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze sharpened, then dropped not to Elias's face, but lower, toward the hand pressed too carefully near his abdomen. The moment stretched. Elias moved his hand away. Too late. "What are you hiding?" Adrian asked. "Nothing that belongs to you." The answer came too fast. Adrian's face closed. In another life, he might have heard the fear beneath those words. In this one, poisoned by forged evidence and old wounds, he heard only betrayal claiming privacy. He reached down and caught Elias by the arm, pulling him to his feet. The grip was firm but not cruel, even angry. Adrian had always known exactly how much strength his hand contained. That almost made it worse. Elias stumbled once. Adrian steadied him by instinct, then released him as though burned by his own reflex. Leave. Adrian said. Elias stared at him. The word hung there. Impossible. Adrian turned away first. Before dawn, you will take nothing bearing the Veil name. Your accounts will be frozen until the investigation concludes. If you are innocent, the truth will surface. If Elias repeated, Adrian did not answer. A laugh almost rose in Elias's throat. It would have been unbecoming, and perhaps a little mad. So he swallowed it until it became something sharper. When the truth surfaces, he said, what will you do with it? Adrian's shoulders stiffened. Elias waited. No reply came. That was the answer. Then he bowed, because some habits survived even when love did not. It was not the bow of an Omega to an Alpha, nor of a servant to his master. It was something older and sadder. A farewell offered to the dead. Take care. Master Veil. The title changed Adrian's face more than accusation could have. Elias had called him that in public. Of course, in council rooms, in corridors filled with listening ears, but in private. For almost a year now, Adrian had been Adrian, spoken rarely, carefully, like a privilege neither of them had named. Adrian turned back. Elias was already walking toward the door. Elias. His steps stopped. The sound of his name in Adrian's voice almost undid him. Not because it was tender. It was not. But it carried something unfinished. And unfinished things were the cruelest kind of hope. Adrian said nothing else. After a moment, Elias continued. The corridor outside was colder than the hall. Servants vanished as he passed. Doors closed. Somewhere, a young maid began crying and was quickly silenced by another. Elias returned to his room alone. No guards followed him. That was Adrian's final mercy or final contempt. Elias could not tell which. His room had always been modest compared to the rest of the estate. A narrow bed, a writing desk, shelves filled with estate ledgers and old medical texts, a pale blue scarf folded over the chair. Left there from a morning when Adrian had noticed his cough and said, without expression, wear something warmer if you insist on being useful. Elias stood in the doorway for several seconds. Then he moved. He did not pack the scarf. He took a worn coat, a little cash hidden in a book spine, 2 vials of suppressants, and the small physician's note he had not yet had the courage to destroy. His hands paused over an unfinished letter beneath the desk drawer. He had written it before the summons came. Adrian, there is something I must tell you. I do not know whether you will see it as a burden or a chain, but the rest blurred. Elias folded the letter once, then slid it beneath a loose floorboard instead of taking it. Perhaps it was foolish. Perhaps some weak part of him wanted proof left behind that he had once intended honesty. At the threshold, he looked back only once. The room already seemed emptied of him. By the time Elias reached the front steps, rain had swallowed the estate road. The guards at the entrance avoided his eyes. One of them, an older beta who had served the family since before Adrian inherited it, opened the gate without a word. Elias stepped through. Behind him, the Veil mansion rose against the storm, vast and luminous and utterly unreachable. For years, he had mistaken its walls for shelter. Now, from the outside, They looked exactly like what they had always been. A fortress. A prison. A place built to keep warmth from escaping. He walked until the lights blurred. The road curved downward through the cypress trees. Mud soaked his shoes. Rain slid beneath his collar and chilled the back of his neck. Once, halfway to the outer gate, pain tightened low in his body. Elias stopped. One hand braced against the stone wall, the other covering his abdomen before he could stop himself. "It's all right," he whispered. The words vanished into the rain. He did not know whether he was speaking to the child or to the part of himself still standing in the great hall, waiting for Adrian Vale to choose him. A car passed on the distant road without slowing. Elias pushed himself forward. At the final gate, the estate lights flickered once behind him. Then, one by one, they went dark, as though the house itself had closed its eyes. Elias reached the iron bars just as the pain returned. Sharper this time. His knees weakened. The world tilted. Rain and stone and black branches twisting together. He tried to breathe through it. Tried to remain silent. Tried. Even now. Not to become another burden someone would regret carrying. But his body had reached the end of what pride could command. Elias collapsed beneath the gate, one hand still locked over his abdomen. Inside the mansion, far beyond the storm and glass and walls, Adrian Vale stood alone in the great hall among the broken crystal. The scent of Elias's pheromone was already fading. The first thing Elias heard after the rain was not a voice, but the sea. It came in a low, endless breathing beyond the cracked window, dragging itself over stones and retreating again into darkness. For several seconds, he did not know where he was. The ceiling above him was not the carved cedar of the Vale estate. There were no chandeliers, no silk curtains, no silent servants waiting for orders from a man whose name could freeze a room. The ceiling here was stained plaster, yellowed at the edges, with a thin line of damp spreading like a bruise above the lamp. He tried to move. Pain answered, not sharp enough to make him cry out, but deep, heavy, unfamiliar. His hand went at once to his abdomen, and only when he felt the faint warmth beneath his palm did his breath return in pieces. "You're awake," said a woman's voice. Elias turned his head. An older beater sat near the stove, rolling clean bandages with slow, practiced hands. Her hair was iron grey, pinned carelessly at the back of her head. She wore a dark wool coat over a faded dress, and one side of her face bore an old burn scar that pulled slightly when she spoke. Her eyes, however, were clear and steady, the kind of eyes that had watched people lie, bleed, beg, and survive. "You collapsed at the North Road station," she said. "A freight driver found you before dawn. He was going to leave you there until he saw the blood on your sleeve." Elias lowered his gaze. His sleeve had been cut open from wrist to elbow, beneath the bandage. The bruise Adrian's hand had left was faint but visible, not because Adrian had meant to hurt him, but because Elias's body had become too fragile to hide every mark. The woman followed his gaze. "He didn't ask questions," she said. "I did. You didn't answer. I was unconscious. You murmured a name." Elias went still. The stove cracked softly. Rainwater tapped from the roof into a metal bucket somewhere outside the room. The world seemed to wait with the patience of someone who already knew. "What name?" he asked. The woman gave him a dry look. "One you don't want. Repeated." Elias closed his eyes. Shame arrived late, colder than fever. He had left Adrian's estate with nothing, had collapsed like a discarded thing at the edge of his world. And even then his body had betrayed him by calling for the person who sent him away. There were humiliations pride could survive. This one slipped beneath it. My belongings, he said. On the chair. He forced himself to sit. The room swayed once, and the woman stood without hurry, crossing to him with a cup in hand. When Elias did not take it immediately, she set it on the small table beside the bed. Drink before you start pretending you're well enough to run. I need to leave. Yes, she said. People who faint from shock and fever usually make excellent travel decisions. Elias looked at her properly then. Who are you? Mara Venn. I used to be a doctor before the inner cities decided beta physicians were useful in disasters and inconvenient afterward. She nodded toward his coat. Your identity card says Elias Wren. It also says you belong to no registered household. That was no longer true yesterday. Perhaps it had never been true in the way that mattered. I'm not asking for charity. Elias said. No. You look like someone trained to refuse kindness before it becomes a debt. Mara sat again. Expression unreadable. Fortunately, I am not kind. I am curious. Elias almost smiled. The effort failed halfway. Mara's gaze dropped briefly to his abdomen. Not with invasion, but with professional certainty. You already knew. His fingers tightened over the blanket. Yes. How far? 6 weeks. Perhaps 7. And the alpha? The room changed at once. Not because Mara spoke sharply, but because the question carried an ordinary weight, and nothing about the answer was ordinary. Elias looked toward the window. Outside. Grey morning pressed against the glass. The storm had thinned into mist, washing the distant roofs of the coastal town until they seemed drawn in charcoal. He is not involved, Elias said. Mara watched him for a while. That is not the same as not knowing. No. Will he come looking? The question should have been simple. Adrian Vale searched for enemies. He reclaimed assets. He punished betrayal. But would he search for Elias, not the secretary? Not the Omega accused of treason. Not the useful shadow who knew every locked corridor of his household. Elias himself. The silence inside him had no answer. I don't know, he said at last. Mara seemed to understand too much from those 3 words. Then you need rest. A new name. And somewhere no one asks why an Omega with expensive hands is sleeping above a closed fish shop. Elias lowered his eyes to his hands. Ink was still trapped beneath the nails of 2 fingers. A ridiculous remnant of another life. Why help me? Mara tied off the last bandage. Because powerful alphas leave a certain kind of ruin behind. After a while, you learn to recognize the weather. Elias did not ask about the scar on her face. That was how the town of Nareth received him, not with warmth, but with practical indifference. Which was safer. It sat along a jagged strip of coast where the sea struck black rocks day and night, and gulls screamed over warehouses with peeling blue doors. No one cared about bloodlines there unless they came attached to unpaid debts. Fishermen watched tides. Widows managed accounts. Beaters carried crates. Omegas kept their heads down and learned which streets became unsafe after dark. Mara gave him a room behind her clinic and a name that belonged to no one. Elias became Elian Rue. The first week passed in fevered fragments. He woke to bitter medicine on his tongue, to Mara's hand checking his pulse, to the thin winter light moving across the wall. Sometimes the room became the Vale estate in his dreams. He would hear marble under his knees. Adrian's voice would say, "Leave," and the child inside him would become a small, vanishing flame he could not protect with both hands. He never cried when awake. Mara noticed and said nothing. By the 10th day, Elias could walk from the bed to the window without gripping the furniture. By the 12th, he began copying medical ledgers for Mara. His script neat enough that she grunted approval but never praised him directly. By the 15th, he learned which herbs were safe for pregnancy and which suppressants must never be mixed with them. By the 20th, he stopped flinching whenever the front bell rang. Almost every evening, the western sky turned the color of old copper, and the sea became a dark animal breathing beneath it. Elias would stand at the rear door of the clinic, one hand resting lightly over his abdomen, and let the salt air strip the veil estate from his skin one layer at a time. It never fully succeeded. Pheromones were memory-made, physical. Adrian's scent had lived too long in the rooms Elias once inhabited. Cedar, frost, smoke after lightning, even now, hundreds of miles away. Elias sometimes woke certain he could smell it near the door. His body would tense before his mind caught up, and for 1 weak second, he would think Adrian had come. Then the room would settle back into damp plaster. Old wood, medicinal herbs, and sea wind. No one came. In the Vale estate, the room Elias left behind remained locked for 3 days. Adrian gave the order himself, then did not enter it. He moved through meetings with the same exacting precision as always. The southern port crisis was contained by dawn, though not without losses. House Ward denied involvement with elegant outrage. The family council demanded a public declaration of punishment. Adrian granted them only silence. Silence, from him, frightened them more. On the 4th night, Rowan found him in the archive corridor. "You've reviewed the access logs 17 times," Rowan said. Adrian did not look up from the terminal. 18. That doesn't make you less unwell. I was unaware your duties included medical diagnosis. They include preventing the head of this family from tearing apart the security system because he refuses to sleep. Adrian's hand stilled over the controls. The corridor smelled faintly of dust and cold metal. At this hour, most of the estate had dimmed, but Adrian kept the archive lights burning white. They carved harsh shadows under his eyes. Rowan leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed. Unlike Adrian, whose danger was quiet and architectural, Rowan carried his violence openly, broad shoulders, scarred knuckles, an alpha's impatience barely civilized by rank. Yet tonight, even his anger seemed restrained by unease. The evidence was too clean. Rowan said. Adrian's gaze sharpened. "You saw it too." Rowan continued. "You just hated what it pointed toward." "I do not hate facts." "No, you hate needing people." The terminal screen went black. For a moment, Rowan looked as though he regretted speaking. Adrian turned slowly, and the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop. "Choose your next sentence carefully," Adrian said. Rowan met his eyes. "Elias saved your life twice. Mine once. He knew every weakness in this house and never used them. If he wanted to betray you, we would not be standing here discussing forged access logs. We would be burying you." The words remained in the air after Rowan left. Adrian did not move for a long time. He had told himself that certainty was discipline, that mercy, given too early, was weakness, that Elias's calm had been guilt disguised as dignity. But memory, once disturbed, became disobedient. Elias kneeling without begging. Elias asking, "Would you have believed me if I had spoken first?" Elias's hand moving too quickly from his abdomen. At 2 in the morning, Adrian unlocked the East Wing surveillance archive again. He slowed the footage from the night in question and watched the figure with Elias's face enter the corridor. Again, again, again. On the 23rd viewing, he saw it. The left hand. Elias always touched door panels with 2 fingers. Never his full palm. An old habit from archive work, where oils from skin could damage preserved paper. The figure in the footage placed his entire hand flat against the scanner. Adrian replayed it. Then he searched older footage. Elias in the archive. Quiet and precise. 2 ink-stained fingers extending toward each panel. Elias carrying files. Elias adjusting his sleeve. Elias turning his face from the camera as if unwilling to be seen even by machines. 2 fingers every time. Adrian stood so abruptly the chair struck the floor behind him. Down. 3 security technicians were dragged from bed. By noon, one admitted that the footage had passed through an external compression channel before entering the estate system. By evening, the channel led to an inactive server leased through 6 false companies. The final company had once belonged to Lucien Ward's brother-in-law. Adrian read the report in the Great Hall. No crystal broke this time. No servants watched. No family council murmured under chandeliers. Only Lucien stood before him, composed as ever. A tenuous association. Lucien said, "You know how these shells are traded. If I wished to frame someone, would I leave such an obvious thread?" Adrian looked at him from the head of the room. No. Lucien's expression softened, just enough to suggest relief. Then Adrian said, "You would leave one obvious enough for me to dismiss as coincidence." For the first time, Lucien was silent. Adrian descended the steps. Each footfall seemed measured against the memory of another night. "Where is he?" "I assume you refer to Mr. Wren. Do not perform ignorance in my house." "Your house," Lucien repeated gently, was almost destroyed by misplaced affection. "You were right to remove him. Whether or not this particular evidence was compromised, Elias Wren had become a vulnerability." Adrian stopped one step above him. The words should have enraged him. Instead, they entered a colder place. A vulnerability. That was what Elias had always been to men like Lucien. Not a person. Not loyalty. Not the quiet presence that remembered which documents Adrian wanted before he asked. Which poisons left no scent. Which nights he could not bear the door fully closed. A weakness to be cut away. Adrian's voice lowered. "You threatened him." Lucien smiled faintly. With what he had nothing. Adrian's heart struck once. Pard. Nothing. The answer was too swift, too assured. After Lucien was escorted out under guard, Adrian went at last to Elias's room. The door opened without sound. Cold air greeted him first, then stillness. The room had been cleaned badly by servants afraid to touch anything meaningful. The bed was made. The desk cleared. The shelves remained in order, but the air had changed. Elias's pheromone, once faint and clean like white tea after rain, had faded until Adrian had to stand perfectly still to find it. There, near the chair. There, by the window. Almost gone. Adrian crossed the room and stopped before the pale blue scarf folded over the back of the chair. He remembered buying it without admitting why. Elias had coughed twice during a winter council meeting, silently enough that no one else noticed. The next morning, the scarf appeared with no note. Elias had worn it for 3 days, then folded it carefully whenever he entered Adrian's study, as though returning warmth to its owner. Adrian reached for it. His hand stopped before touching the fabric. On the desk, a floorboard near the rear leg sat unevenly. He knelt. The letter beneath was folded once. No seal, no address. His name written at the top in Elias's controlled, elegant hand. Adrian, there is something I must tell you. I do not know whether you will see it as a burden or a chain, but I have kept silent too long. If I wait until the world is kinder, I may never speak. If I speak now, I may lose the last place I thought I belonged. The rest of the page ended abruptly. The lower half had been torn away. Adrian held the remaining paper between his fingers until it creased. Outside, The estate moved around him. Guards changed shifts. Servants whispered, "Somewhere below." Lucien's allies were being detained one by one. The machinery of power continued because Adrian had built it that way. Ruthless and obedient, able to function even when the man at its center finally understood that control was not the same as protection. He read the letter again. A burden or a chain. The words blurred, then sharpened with terrible clarity. Adrian rose slowly. Rowan. His cousin appeared at the door minutes later. Breath, uneven from running. "Find the missing page," Adrian said. Rowan's gaze moved from the letter to Adrian's face. Whatever he saw there made him straighten. And Elias. Adrian looked toward the window. Rain had begun again. Thin and soundless against the glass. For the first time in years. The head of the Vale family looked less like a tyrant than a man standing inside the ruins of a decision he could not take back. "Fend him," Adrian said. The command left his mouth like an order. In the silence after it, it became something else. The man begged before Adrian asked a single question. He was one of the lesser security clerks. A narrow-shouldered beater with ink on his cuffs and terror in the corners of his mouth. 2 guards had brought him to the old winter study, where the curtains remained drawn, though afternoon pressed silver light against the windows. Adrian stood behind the desk Elias used to manage when confidential reports overflowed the main archive. The chair was empty. The lamp was unlit. The room smelled faintly of paper. Rain. And something Adrian had spent 3 days pretending not to seek. White tea after rain. Almost gone. I only moved the files. The clerk said hoarsely, "I never opened them. Sir, I swear on my mother's grave. I never knew what they were." Adrian's gaze rested on the clerk's hands. They shook too violently for practiced deception. Fear could be useful, but only when it did not drown the truth. "Who instructed you?" The clerk swallowed. "Mr. Ward's assistant." "Not Mr. Ward himself. She said the transfer had your authorization." "And you believed her?" "She had the black seal. No one outside Adrian's direct command should have touched that seal. Not even Lucien. Especially not Lucien." Adrian opened the drawer beside him and found, with a precision that felt almost ceremonial, the absence of one small square space in the velvet lining. The missing seal had not been stolen recently. The dust around it had settled too evenly. Elias would have noticed. The thought came without permission. Elias noticed everything that might one day become dangerous. A misfiled permit. A servant with debts. A guest whose perfume disguised poison. A council member whose hand lingered too long near a hidden blade. Adrian had once considered such attentiveness useful. Later, though he had never admitted it, he had allowed himself to become accustomed to it. As a man in winter becomes accustomed to a fire he did not build, now the cold had returned. "Leave," Adrian said. The clerk nearly collapsed with relief. The guards took him away, and the study sank back into quiet. Rowan entered not long after, carrying a thin folder beneath one arm. He looked as though he had not slept either. Fatigue made his temper sharper. But something in Adrian's face kept him from speaking carelessly. "The assistant is gone," Rowan said. "Her room was emptied before dawn 2 days ago. False name. False registry. She entered Vale service 6 months after Elias did." Adrian accepted the folder, but did not open it at once. Lucien prepared this for years. Or longer. "Say what you mean." Rowan's jaw tightened. He didn't just want Elias removed. He wanted you to be the one who did it. The words crossed the room and settled where no blade could be removed cleanly. Adrian looked toward the desk. There was a faint scratch along the right edge where Elias used to tap his pen while thinking. Not impatience. Calculation. Elias's stillness had always contained movement beneath it, quiet as water under ice. Adrian opened the folder. Inside were travel records, falsified server registrations, private payments, and a photograph of Lucien's missing assistant entering the East Archive wearing Elias's coat. Not an imitation close enough for anyone who knew him, close enough for cameras, close enough for suspicion already sharpened by fear. What did Elias know? Adrian asked. Rowan understood the question beneath the question. Why had he not spoken? Why had he stood there and let the accusation become a sentence? Why had the most cautious person in the household walked into ruin without raising a wall between himself and it? We found traces of a separate investigation in his ledger. Rowan said. He was tracking port discrepancies. Quietly. No official access requests. No reports filed. He was protecting the source. Or protecting you from acting before he had proof. Adrian's fingers closed over the folder. All his life. He had believed restraint meant withholding mercy. He had been taught that affection created hostages and hesitation invited knives. Elias had understood those rules and still remained unbearably human. He remembered birthdays no one celebrated. He spoke gently to injured guards even when they looked ashamed to accept gentleness from an Omega. Adrian had mistaken that softness for fragility. He had not understood it was discipline of another kind. In Nareth, Elias learned how to disappear by performing ordinary exhaustion. Mara cut his hair on a grey morning while gulls screamed over the clinic roof. The mirror before him was speckled with age, splitting his reflection into pale fragments. The man looking back wore a borrowed brown sweater and had shadows beneath his eyes that no powder could hide. Without the Vale household's tailored clothing, without the silver access seal at his wrist, he seemed younger and more breakable. Or perhaps that was only because he had finally stopped standing where everyone could strike him. You dislike it, Mara said, lowering the scissors. It's practical. That is not the same thing. It will do. Mara gave a sound that might have been amusement, spoken like someone who has accepted very little in life because it was wanted. Elias touched the uneven ends near his jaw. Elias Wren had always been neat, almost severe. Elian Rue looked softer around the face, less memorable if he kept his eyes lowered. A useful person to become a safer one. On the table beside him lay a forged town registry, 2 employment certificates, and a small packet of medicine wrapped in brown paper. Mara had obtained all of it without explanation. When Elias offered money, she took only enough to preserve his pride. You'll copy records in the front room, she said. No lifting crates, no night walks, no suppressants unless I approve them. I know how to manage my condition. No, Mara said. You know how to survive neglect. That is different from care. Elias looked away first. The child was still too small to make itself known. Yet its existence rearranged every silence inside him. Hunger came strangely. Fatigue arrived without warning. Certain scents turned his stomach. At night, he lay awake with one palm over the place where nothing showed yet and tried to imagine a future small enough to protect. A rented room, warm milk, a cradle by the stove, no family name, no inheritance, no Alpha standing at the door with frost in his voice. Sometimes, against his own will, he imagined Adrian learning the truth. In those forbidden imaginings, Adrian never shouted. He simply stood very still, as he did when anger had cut too deep for expression. Then his gaze would lower, not with accusation, but with the stunned helplessness of a man seeing a door he had burned from the wrong side. Elias always ended the thought there. Hope was dangerous not because it lied, but because it remembered accurately enough to wound. 3 weeks after his arrival in Nareth, the first stranger came. He entered near closing. dressed like a merchant but wearing city boots too clean for coastal mud. His eyes passed over the medicine shelves, Mara's scared face, the cracked stove, and finally Elias at the records desk. He smiled with polite insignificance. "I'm looking for a young Omega," he said. "Travelled north during the storm last month. May have been ill." Mara did not pause in grinding dried roots. "This is a clinic. We see ill people. He may be using the name Elias Wren." The pen in Elias's hand did not stop. Years beside Adrian had taught him that stillness could be more suspicious than movement. He finished the number he was copying, added a line through an old debt entry, and reached for the next page. Mara said, "Never heard of him." The stranger sighed, as though disappointed by human unreliability. "His family is worried." Then his family should have worried sooner. His smile thinned. "You are direct, Doctor." "I am closed." For a moment, the room held its breath. Elias felt the shape of danger without looking up. It was a small danger, perhaps no more than inquiry, but his body had become an instrument tuned to threats against the life inside him. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips, steady only because he forced it to be. The stranger left after buying a vial of useless tonic. Mara locked the door behind him. "Pack," she said. Elias looked up. "You said running blindly is foolish, and staying politely for your hunters is worse." Was he Vale? Mara's expression shifted. Not pity. Calculation edged with concern. "Not if your alpha has any pride." "My alpha." The phrase entered him before he could reject it. He hated the reflexive ache it left behind. "He is not mine," Elias said. Mara tied the curtains shut. "Good. Then leaving him should be easier." It was not. At the estate, Adrian received the same report an hour after midnight. A hired searcher had located a possible lead in Nerith, but had withdrawn after encountering resistance from a beta doctor. The report described a pale Omega clerk in the back room. Brown sweater, lowered eyes, left-handed pen grip. Elias was not left-handed. Adrian read the line 3 times. Then he understood. Elias had seen the searcher. Elias had hidden in plain sight. Elias was alive. The force of it struck so suddenly that Adrian had to set the paper down. Alive. Not forgiven, not found, not safe, but alive. He stood alone in the winter study, one hand braced against the desk, and discovered that relief could be as cruel as grief when it arrived too late to be innocent. For weeks, imagination had punished him with every possible version of Elias lying nameless in a ditch, feverish in a cheap inn, taken by men who knew what an unprotected Omega could be worth. Adrian had ordered cities searched, roads watched, registries opened. He had told himself it was duty, correction, justice. The lie had become too thin to wear. He wanted Elias back, not because Elias knew the ports, not because the Vale household needed his mind, not because guilt demanded an object. He wanted the impossible privilege of entering a room and finding Elias there, calm at the desk, turning slightly when Adrian approached as though he had always known the shape of his footsteps. Want, stripped of righteousness, was a humiliating thing. Rowan found him before dawn with another folder. We traced the missing page. Adrian's head lifted. It passed through Lucien's assistant before she disappeared. She sold several items to a broker in the lower city, probably not knowing their meaning. We recovered most of them. Most? Rowan placed a sealed evidence sleeve on the desk. Inside lay a charred scrap of paper. The handwriting was Elias's. Only part of a sentence remained. Smoke darkened at the edges, fragile enough that touching it would destroy it. Adrian did not breathe as he read. "If anything happens before I can tell him, Protect the rest had burned away. He stared at the final word until it seemed to rearrange the room around him. Protect what? A source, a witness, a record. Elias, meticulous even in fear, would never write so vaguely unless the thing itself was too dangerous to name. On the back of the scrap, almost erased by heat, was the faint imprint of another word, pressed from the missing page beneath it. Not ink. Pressure. Child. Adrian went completely still. Rowan's voice came from far away. Adrian. But Adrian was no longer in the study. He was back in the great hall, watching Elias's hand move too quickly from his abdomen, hearing his own voice command him to kneel, seeing the pale control in Elias's face as pain tightened beneath it. The world did not break loudly. It narrowed to one burned word and the memory of rain. The winter storm arrived before the child did. By dusk, Nareth had vanished beneath wind and white rain. Its narrow streets flooded ankle-deep, its harbour bells clanging wildly in the dark. Fishing boats groaned against their ropes like wounded animals. Shutters slammed. Chimneys coughed smoke sideways. The sea, black and swollen beyond the clinic windows, hurled itself against the rocks with a force that made the floorboards tremble. Elias stood in the back room with one hand gripping the edge of the table. Mara looked up from sorting medicine packets and saw his face. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine. You're sweating through your collar in the middle of winter." Elias lowered himself into the nearest chair before pride could make the decision worse. His abdomen, round beneath the loose grey sweater, Mara had altered twice already, tightened again with slow, merciless pressure. He placed a hand over it, breathing evenly through his nose. The pain had begun before noon as a dull pull in his back. By evening, it had sharpened into waves that stole the shape of his thoughts. Mara crossed the room, her expression calm in the way only experienced doctors could be calm, never comforting, never panicked. Already measuring distance. Blood. Time. Risk. "How far apart?" she asked. Elias looked toward the window. Snow struck the glass and melted instantly into streaks. 7 minutes. Sometimes 6. Mara said nothing for a moment. That silence frightened him more than any exclamation could have. "It's early," Elias said. "Yes." "How early?" "Early enough that we stop pretending this is ordinary." The next contraction bent him forward before he could answer. His fingers clenched around the chair arm. He did not make a sound. Mara watched his mouth press into a white line and cursed under her breath. Not at him, but at every cruel circumstance that had taught a pregnant Omega to endure pain, as though permission to suffer might be revoked. When it passed, Elias opened his eyes. "I can still walk." "To where?" "Into the sea. To the birthing ward. The roads are flooded, and the bridge near the square is down. Even if I had a carriage, I wouldn't move you in this weather." Mara turned away sharply, already pulling instruments from drawers. "You're staying here." The clinic suddenly became too small. The old stove, the narrow bed in the adjoining room, the shelves of dried herbs and sterilized cloth. Elias had imagined the birth often, though never with much softness. He had imagined fear, exhaustion, blood, perhaps danger, but he had also imagined a quiet morning. Mara's steady hands, a cradle prepared beside the wall. Not this. Not wind screaming through the roof seams as if the whole world wanted entry. He looked down at his abdomen, beneath his palm. The child shifted faintly. A small, stubborn movement against the tightening pain. For months, Elias had trained himself not to think of bloodline. A child was not a family weapon. A child was not an heir. A child was not proof of anything Adrian had lost the right to claim. And yet, during the deepest hours of night, when the baby moved beneath his hand. Elias sometimes felt an echo of cedar and frost in his own memory and hated himself for wondering whether Adrian would have placed his hand there carefully or not at all. Another contraction came. This time, a sound escaped him. Mara's face changed. "Bed," she said. Hours lost their edges after that. There was only the storm. Mara's voice. The lamp flame bending in draughts, and pain returning with the terrible patience of tides. Elias lay with his hair damp against his temples, one hand twisted in the sheet, the other sometimes reaching for nothing before he forced it back to the mattress. Mara moved around him with efficient severity, checking his pulse, his temperature, the child's position, the towels warming near the stove. "You listen to me," she said at some point, her scar drawn tight in the lamplight. "No disappearing inside your head. You stay here." "I'm here." "No. Half of you is in some mansion letting a ghost hurt you again. Bring it back." Elias laughed once, breathless and broken. "You're cruel." "I'm useful." The pain rose again, higher than before, leaving no room for memory. Elias arched, then curled around it. Teeth clenched hard enough that his jaw trembled. His body had endured exile, hunger, fever, fear. Loneliness stretched thin across months of hiding. This was different. This demanded not endurance alone, but surrender. He had to open around the very thing he feared losing most. At midnight, the power failed. The clinic fell into darkness so complete that for a second Elias thought he had gone blind. Then Mara lit 3 oil lamps, their flames blooming gold across the room. Shadows climbed the walls. Outside, thunder rolled so close it seemed to split the sky over the roof. "Elias," Mara said. He turned his head slowly. She almost never used his real name. "The child is coming." In the Vale estate, Adrian stood before the locked nursery wing that had not been opened in 22 years. The corridor smelled of old wood and sealed dust. His mother had ordered the wing closed after his younger brother died in infancy, long before Adrian inherited the family and turned grief into architecture. He had not thought of the place in years. Tonight, after the physician confirmed what the burned imprint had already told him, that Elias had likely been pregnant when he left, Adrian had walked here without intending to. Rowan stood several steps behind him, quiet for once. The coastal lead went cold. Rowan said, "Mara Venn vanished from Nereth 3 days after our man visited. The clinic reopened under a local apprentice, but she and the Omega clerk are gone." Adrian looked at the nursery door. "Where?" "We're searching the northern roads. The storm has cut half the routes. If Elias is still near the coast, movement will be difficult. If Elias is still near the coast, if Elias is alive, if the child—" Adrian closed his eyes. Memory punished with precision. Elias kneeling on cold marble. Elias's hand over his abdomen. Elias asking whether Adrian would believe him. Adrian had thought betrayal made him merciless. Now he understood that fear had. He had been so afraid of being deceived that he chose to become the first wound. "What did the physician say?" Rowan asked, though he already knew. Adrian's voice was flat. Stress, exposure, lack of care, suppressants used improperly, all could endanger an Omega pregnancy. Rowan's anger flashed and vanished. There were accusations even he would not speak aloud because Adrian had already made himself their home. The storm struck the estate windows. Adrian opened the nursery door. Dust lifted in the stale air. The room beyond was pale beneath its coverings, a small carved cradle, a cabinet of folded linen gone yellow with age, faded wallpaper patterned with silver leaves. Everything had been preserved so carefully it no longer looked like a room meant for life. It looked like grief waiting for permission to decay. Adrian stepped inside and touched the edge of the cradle. He had commanded armies of guards, broken political alliances, ruined men who thought themselves untouchable. Yet before this small, abandoned thing, his hand trembled once. No one saw, except Rowan. No one mentioned it. In a room above a closed bakery 2 towns away from Nereth, Elias began to lose too much blood. Mara did not tell him immediately. He knew anyway. Doctors could hide fear from patients. They could not hide urgency from someone trained to hear the unsaid. Her instructions became shorter. Her hands moved faster. The towels changed too often. The child came just before dawn, during a silence between thunder. For one suspended second, there was no cry. Elias tried to lift his head. The room spun violently. Mara bent over the small, blood-wet body in her hands, rubbing, clearing, murmuring something too low for him to catch. The lamp behind her flickered. "Mara," Elias whispered. No answer. "Mara." Then the baby cried. It was not loud. It was thin, furious, impossibly alive. Elias broke, not into sobs. He had no strength for that. The tears simply spilled from the corners of his eyes into his hair as Mara placed the child against his chest. Warmth touched his skin. A small mouth opened in complaint. Tiny fingers curled weakly against him. "There," Mara said, and her own voice was rougher than usual. "There he is." He. Elias looked down. The child's hair was dark, damp against a fragile skull. His skin held the flushed vulnerability of new life. His face still crumpled with outrage at the world. But when his eyes opened briefly, unfocused and storm grey beneath swollen lids, Elias felt the room tilt in a new way. Adrian's eyes. Not fully. Not yet. Newborns changed. Features softened. Colour deepened. Perhaps he was imagining it. Perhaps grief had taught him to see ghosts in flesh. Then the child's scent emerged beneath the blood and milk and birth warmth. Faint, almost impossible to name. But there it was, the clean, sharp trace of high-ranking alpha blood, wrapped in the softer sweetness of an infant who knew nothing of power. Mara inhaled once and went very still. Elias looked at her. She did not lie. That was one of the reasons he trusted her. "He'll need careful shielding as he grows," Mara said. "If others sent it. I know." His arms tightened around the baby, but his strength failed almost immediately. The room dimmed at the edges. Mara took the child before Elias could drop him, swaddling him in clean cloth with a tenderness she would later deny. "What will you call him?" she asked. Elias's lips moved. For months, he had avoided choosing a name. Names made futures. Names invited loss. But now the child existed outside him, warm and furious and breathing, and deserved something not born from fear. "Noah," he whispered. Mara band closer. "Noah." Elias nodded faintly. "A place after the flood." Mara's expression shifted. "That's a good name," she said. The bleeding worsened after that. Fever dragged Elias under by morning. He drifted through rooms that did not exist, through marble halls and rain-black gates, through the sound of a cup breaking against stone. Sometimes he felt Noah near him, sometimes not, and panic clawed its way up from places too deep for speech. Once, in the white blur of pain and medicine, he turned his face toward the door. "Adrian," he said. Mara froze beside the bed. Elias reached toward the empty air, fingers trembling, not like someone begging to be saved, but like someone trying to return something fragile before it shattered. "Don't," his breath caught. "Don't take him." "No one is taking him," Mara said fiercely, Do you hear me? No one. But Elias was not hearing her. He was back beneath chandeliers, kneeling on marble, holding a secret too dangerous to speak and too heavy to carry alone. His voice thinned until it became almost soundless. Believe me once. Mara looked away. By evening, the fever broke. When Elias woke, the room smelled of milk, herbs, rain-soaked brick, and newborn warmth. His body felt hollowed out and stitched back together badly. Mara slept upright in a chair with Noah bundled against her shoulder, one hand cupped securely around the child's back. For a while, Elias only watched them. Then Mara opened one eye. Before you apologize for surviving inconveniently, don't. Elias tried to speak. His throat scraped. Did I say anything? Mara's face became unreadable. He knew then. Heat rose weakly to his eyes, not tears this time, but shame. Deep and old, he turned his face toward the wall. I was feverish. Yes, I didn't mean it. Mara shifted Noah carefully into his arms. People rarely mean what fever says. That does not make it false. Elias looked down at his son. Noah slept with one tiny fist pressed near his cheek, utterly indifferent to bloodlines, conspiracies, and ruined men. Elias touched the edge of the blanket and felt a quiet terror, unlike anything he had known before. Love, when it arrived this purely, was not gentle. It made the whole world into a threat. He can never know, Elias said. Mara did not ask who. Outside, the storm moved east, far away. In the Vale nursery, Adrian remained beside the empty cradle until dawn. When morning came, a messenger arrived with the latest report. No confirmed location. No body found. No further trace of Elias Wren or the unknown Omega traveling under the name Elian Rue. Only one witness from the coastal road remembered a pregnant man being moved during the storm by an older, scarred beta physician. Pregnant. The word sat on the page with merciless simplicity. Adrian read the report once. Then again, the estate around him was waking. Footsteps crossed distant corridors. Servants opened curtains. Somewhere below, men waited for orders against Lucien Ward's remaining network. The Vale family continued breathing. Adrian did not. He stood in the nursery where no child had cried for more than 20 years, holding proof that Elias had carried his heir into exile while he slept beneath chandeliers and called himself betrayed. On the covered cradle, dust had gathered thick enough to mark a fingerprint. Adrian looked at it for a long time. Then he lowered his head, and, for the first time since Elias left, the tyrant of the Vale family made no effort to look untouched. Adrian found them by the sound of a child laughing. It was not a loud sound. The narrow street swallowed most of it beneath the evening noise of carts, fishmongers, gulls, and the sea breaking endlessly against the harbour walls. Yet it reached him with impossible clarity, slipping through the damp air as though every other sound had been waiting for permission to fade. He stopped beneath the awning of a closed tea shop. Across the street, a small boy crouched near a rain puddle with both hands on his knees, solemnly watching a paper boat struggle against the gutter current. His dark hair curled at the damp edges. His coat was too plain for wealth, but carefully mended, the cuffs folded back twice. When the boat spun, caught on a pebble. The boy reached out with a twig and freed it with the grave concentration of a commander rescuing a fleet. Then he looked up. Adrian forgot how to breathe. The boy's eyes were grey, not the pale grey of winter clouds, not the soft grey common among northern families, but the hard storm silver that had marked the Vale bloodline for 5 generations. In a child's face, that inheritance should have softened. It did not. The boy had Elias's mouth, Elias's stillness before thought. Elias's slight tilt of the head when observing strangers too carefully, but the eyes were Adrian's. The child smiled at the paper boat as if it had survived by its own courage. Noah. A voice called from the clinic doorway. Adrian's hand closed slowly at his side. Elias stepped into view, carrying a folded wool blanket over one arm. 5 years had altered him with cruel subtlety. He was thinner than Adrian remembered, but not fragile. His hair, cut shorter now, framed a face sharpened by survival and softened by parenthood. The pale blue scarf was gone. So were the tailored lines of the Vale estate. He wore simple clothes, sleeves rolled to the wrist, his posture calm as he leaned down to touch the child's shoulder. Noah turned at once. "Papa." It almost sank. But it didn't. I helped. I saw. Elias's hand moved over the boy's damp hair, brushing it away from his brow. Heroic intervention. Noah considered this seriously. Will Dr. Mara say the gutter is dirty? She will say it before asking whether you washed your hands. Then we should wash first. That is wisdom. The exchange was ordinary, almost painfully so. No chandeliers, no bloodline oaths, no guards, no servants flinching at commands. Only a child with wet shoes and an Omega kneeling in the street to fasten his coat. Adrian stood in the shadow of the tea shop and understood, with a devastation too quiet for expression, that Elias had built an entire world after leaving him. A small one, a precarious one, a world Adrian had not been needed to create. Rowan, standing half a step behind him, did not speak. For once, his silence was not caution before authority, but mercy. "Do not approach yet," Rowan said at last, low enough that no one across the street could hear. Adrian's gaze did not leave Elias. "I know." And he did. That was the worst of it. 5 years ago, he would have crossed the street, taken Elias by the arm, demanded answers, ordered protection, claimed the child, and called the ruin afterward repair. 5 years ago, power had still seemed like a language that could translate grief into obedience. Now he saw Elias lift Noah into his arms when a cart rolled too close. Saw the child rest his chin on Elias's shoulder with unconscious trust, and knew there were doors that could not be forced without destroying the house behind them. Elias turned slightly. Adrian stepped back too late. Their eyes met across the rain-bright street. There was no dramatic collapse in Elias's face. No cry. No visible fear. That control, once familiar, struck Adrian harder than panic would have. Elias only went very still, one hand spreading across Noah's back. Noah followed his gaze. "Papa." Elias blinked once. The street resumed around them, but the air between the two men remained severed from time. "Go inside," Elias said softly. Noah looked from him to Adrian, curiosity sharpening. Who is he? A guest. The word was small, clean, merciless. Adrian crossed the street then, because staying away had become another kind of cowardice. He stopped several steps from them, far enough that Elias would not need to retreat. Rain gathered along the edge of his dark coat and fell steadily onto the stones. Elias. Noah's eyes widened a little at the name. Elias's expression did not change. "That is not the name I use here." Adrian accepted the blow without lowering his gaze. "Then tell me what to call you." For a moment, something almost bitter moved at the corner of Elias's mouth. "You ask permission now." Rowan looked away. Adrian deserved the question. He deserved worse. "Yes," he said. The single word unsettled Elias more than any argument might have. His hand tightened around Noah's coat. And the child, sensing tension without understanding it, leaned closer into him. Adrian watched the movement. It was not fear exactly. It was instinctive loyalty. The absolute claim of a child whose universe began and ended with the person holding him. Adrian had once thought blood created bonds. He had been wrong. Blood created vulnerability. Care created bonds. Mara appeared behind Elias in the clinic doorway. Older now, greyer. Her burn scar stark in the damp light. Her eyes landed on Adrian and narrowed with immediate recognition, not of his face, perhaps, but of his weather. Inside, she said. Elias did not move. Mara's voice sharpened. The boy is cold. That reached him. Elias looked down at Noah and forced the scene back into order by sheer will. Go with Dr. Mara. Noah hesitated. Papa, I'll come in soon. The boy studied Adrian again. Too observant, too calm for his age. Then he obeyed. Though halfway to the doorway, he turned back and asked, Are you making Papa sad? The question entered Adrian like a blade without ornament. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Noah, I'm asking. Adrian looked at his son for the first time with no distance left to hide behind. I have before. Noah considered him. Children, Adrian realized, possessed a cruelty adults lost through politeness. They believed answers should be whole. Then don't do it again, Noah said. Mara placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and guided him inside. The clinic door closed. Rain filled the silence. Elias adjusted the blanket over his arm. Though there was nothing to adjust. You found us. I did. Lucien. In custody. His network collapsed 3 years ago. Some of his people escaped. I have been closing the remaining routes since. Efficient, Elias said. Adrian's jaw tightened. Do not make this about his punishment. What should I make it about? Elias finally looked at him fully. Your regret. There it was. Not anger shouted in the great hall. Not accusation thrown to wound. Something far more difficult to bear, Elias, speaking with the calm of someone who had carried his pain so long it no longer needed performance. Adrian lowered his eyes first. I came too late. Yes. No mercy. Good. Adrian thought. He had no right to receive it easily. I know about the child. Elias's face went still in a different way. The street seemed to narrow around them. Somewhere nearby, water dripped from a broken sign. A cartwheel splashed through mud at the corner. He has a name, Elias said. Noah. The name was almost unbearable to say. Elias heard it. The faintest tremor moved through his fingers. He is not an heir for you to recover. I know. No, you don't. The calm thinned at last, revealing the scar beneath. You know how to claim. You know how to guard what you claim. You know how to make enemies afraid to touch what bears your name. But Noah does not bear your name. Adrian accepted each sentence as if standing beneath controlled blows. I did not come to take him. Then why are you here? Because I have been living in the room you left behind. Because every corridor of that house learned your absence better than it ever learned your footsteps. Because I read half a letter until the paper nearly tore in my hands. Because I sent you into the rain carrying my child and called it justice. None of those answers deserved to be spoken beautifully. To ask, Adrian said, if there is anything I am still allowed to do. Elias stared at him. For 5 years, he had imagined many versions of Adrian's return. In some, Adrian was furious. In others, coldly possessive. In the weakest ones, the ones Elias despised himself for allowing near sleep, Adrian was devastated and tender and impossible to hate. He had not imagined this. A powerful alpha standing in a muddy street, wet from rain, asking like a man who had finally discovered that permission existed. It made nothing easier. You can leave. Elias said. Adrian's face did not change. Today. Completely. The word landed. Adrian looked toward the clinic door where Noah had disappeared. Through the fogged glass. A small shadow moved, then vanished. Perhaps the boy was listening. Perhaps Mara had pulled him away. If that is what you decide, Adrian said, I will not force the door open. Elias laughed once. Softly, without humor. How noble. No. Adrian's voice roughened. Not noble. Late. The honesty struck too near. Elias turned away as though to end the conversation. Then the clinic window exploded inward. Glass burst across the street-facing room. Noah screamed. Mara shouted something from inside. Elias moved before thought, dropping the blanket and lunging toward the door. Adrian was faster. He caught Elias by the shoulder, not to restrain him, but to pull him behind the stone column as a second shot cracked through the rain and struck the clinic sign above them. Wood splintered. People in the streets screamed and scattered. Let go, Elias said, struggling. Noah is inside, Adrian said. His voice had changed completely. This was the Alpha Elias remembered from danger, cold, precise, emptied of everything except calculation. Yet his hand loosened the moment Elias twisted against it, as though even now he remembered not to hold too tightly. Rowan was already moving, gun drawn beneath his coat, crossing toward the alley where the shot had come from. Two of Adrian's guards emerged from neighboring storefronts, their cover abandoned. Elias realized then that Adrian had not come alone into his life. He had surrounded the street before approaching. He should have felt violated. Instead, as another shot tore through the clinic frame, he felt only terror. Noah. Elias ran. The front room was chaos. Shelves broken. Medicine bottles shattered across the floor. Mara crouched behind the counter with Noah clutched against her. One hand over his head. Blood ran down Mara's temple from a glass cut. But her grip on the child did not loosen. Noah saw Elias and began to sob. Papa. Elias reached him just as a man stepped through the rear entrance. Not one of Adrian's guards. Not a local. His face was unfamiliar. His coat dark with rain. His weapon already raised toward the child, whose scent even untrained senses could mark as valuable. Elias placed himself in front of Noah. There was no time to think of fear. No time to remember marble floors or forged evidence, or the 1,000 ways power destroyed the powerless. There was only Noah behind him and a gun before him. Then Adrian entered. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He crossed the distance with lethal quiet and drove the attacker backward before the shot could be fired. The weapon struck the floor. The man hit the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Adrian took the blow meant for his ribs without slowing, caught the attacker's wrist, and twisted until bone gave beneath the pressure. Noah cried harder. Elias gathered him into his arms, shielding his face against his chest. The boy trembled violently. Elias pressed his lips to Noah's hair, whispering nonsense, promises, apologies, anything to cover the sound of violence behind them. When it was over, Adrian stood near the rear door with blood on his sleeve. Not much. Enough. Elias saw it before Adrian could hide it. A knife had cut through the side of his coat, darkening the fabric near his waist. Adrian swayed once. So subtly, no one else might have noticed. Elias noticed. He hated that he noticed. Their eyes met over Noah's bowed head. For one suspended instant, they were back in the old pattern, Adrian wounded and refusing care. Elias seeing through him. The room full of things, neither would say. Then Adrian looked away first. Take them to the safe house, he told Rowan, who had returned, dragging another captured attacker by the collar. Elias's arms tightened around Noah. No. Adrian turned back. No more houses of yours. Elias said. His voice shook now. Not from weakness, but from the force required to remain standing. No more lot gates. No more protection that becomes a cage. Adrian's face whitened slightly beneath the rain and blood. He nodded once, then choose the place. The answer stole Elias's next refusal. Mara, still bleeding, gave a short, humorless laugh from behind the counter. Wonderful. He learns quickly when stabbed. Adrian did not react. Noah lifted his tear-streaked face from Elias's chest and looked at Adrian. His small voice came raw from crying. Are the bad men gone? Adrian lowered himself slowly to one knee. Not close, not touching. He knelt where Noah could see his hands were empty. For now, he said, I will make sure they cannot come back. Noah sniffed. You're bleeding. It is not important. Elias closed his eyes. How many times had he heard that sentence? How many wounds had been dismissed because Adrian believed the body existed only to serve will? Noah looked offended. Papa says blood is always important. Adrian's gaze moved to Elias. Something passed between them, then not forgiveness, not trust, not even tenderness. Recognition, perhaps. The terrible kind that arrived when two people saw the same old wound from opposite sides. He is right, Adrian said quietly. Elias held Noah closer. Outside. Rain continued falling through the shattered clinic window, washing blood and medicine together across the floor. The safe place Elias chose was a chapel without a god. It stood at the edge of Nareth's old cemetery, abandoned after the roof collapsed over the altar 30 years ago. Ivy had swallowed most of the stone walls, and rain slipped freely through broken rafters into rows of warped benches. No one prayed there anymore. Fishermen avoided it after dusk because the wind made the cracked bell hum without being touched. Children dared one another to run past the gate. Lovers carved initials into the outer stones and left before the fog rose. To Elias, it was perfect. No locked iron gates, no family crest, no servants waiting for orders. Only old stone, damp wood, sea wind, and a narrow back room Mara had once used during an outbreak when the town clinic overflowed. It had one door, 2 windows, and enough distance from the main road that strangers could not approach unnoticed. Adrian did not comment when Elias named it. He only said, then we go there. They moved before dawn. Rowan took Mara in the first carriage with Noah hidden beneath a travelling cloak, still hiccuping softly from exhausted tears. Elias rode in the second, seated opposite Adrian with a medical bag between them like a border neither had permission to cross. The wound at Adrian's side had been bound in haste. Blood still seeped slowly through the cloth whenever the carriage jolted. Elias did not look at it. He looked at the window instead, where the wet town blurred into grey streets and shuttered shops. He had spent 5 years teaching himself that Adrian Vale existed in another world. That world had found him anyway, dragging guns and guards and blood to the clinic floor, where Noah had learned fear from adult faces. Across from him, Adrian sat unnaturally still. It was the stillness of someone conserving strength. Elias knew the shape of it too well. Adrian's right hand rested near his coat, not quite pressing the wound. His face gave away nothing, but a faint line of sweat had formed at his temple. You should have let Mara stitch it properly, Elias said before he could stop himself. Adrian's eyes lifted. The carriage wheels struck a flooded rut. His jaw tightened once. There was no time. There was time for you to issue 6 separate orders. 7. The correction was quiet, almost absurdly familiar. Elias turned back to the window. Anger should have risen. Instead, something worse moved inside him, a tired recognition, like touching an old scar through cloth. still counting everything. Adrian did not answer immediately. Then he said, "Not everything." Elias almost looked at him. He did not. At the chapel, Rowan's men secured the perimeter without entering the back room. That had been Elias's condition. No armed alpha would stand near Noah unless Elias allowed it. No one would touch the boy without permission. No one would call him heir. Adrian accepted all of it. Elias hated that acceptance more than resistance. Resistance would have given him something solid to push against. This careful obedience left him alone with the unbearable question of whether a man could change after destroying what mattered. Mara stitched Adrian in the side room while Elias sat with Noah near the broken nave. The child had stopped crying, which worried Elias more. Noah sat on a folded blanket, knees tucked under his chin, staring at the rain dripping through the roof. His paper boat from the gutter was gone. One sleeve of his coat bore a small streak of dried medicine from the shattered clinic floor. Elias knelt before him. Noah. The boy did not look away from the rain. Was that man going to hurt me because of my scent? Elias's throat tightened. He had planned answers for this. Careful ones. Soft ones. Lies small enough to protect a child, but not large enough to become another betrayal. Yet Noah was 5 years old and already too observant. Children born in hiding learned patterns adults wished they would miss. "Yes," Elias said. Noah's fingers curled around his own sleeves. "Because I smell like him." The chapel seemed to empty around the question. Elias placed one hand over Noah's small, cold fingers. "Because some people think blood means ownership. They are wrong." "Is he my father?" Rain struck stone. From the side room, Mara's voice murmured something low. Adrian did not respond. Elias could not tell whether he had heard. Some part of him hoped he had. Another part wanted to shield even this sentence from him. "Yes," Elias said. Noah looked at him then. His grey eyes were too steady. Too much like Adrian's when searching for a weakness, and too much like Elias's when trying not to show one. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to grow first." Grow into what? Someone who knew he belonged to himself before anyone told him otherwise. Noah thought about that for a long time. Then he asked, "Did he know about me?" Elias closed his eyes briefly. "No." "Why?" There were cruelties that could be made simple for children and cruelties that could not. Elias had spent years thinking he would protect Noah from the truth by delaying it. Now the truth stood outside the side room with blood on its shirt, waiting like weather. "Because I was afraid," Elias said. Noah's small face changed. Not disappointment. Something gentler and more painful. Of him. Elias's hand trembled once before he steadied it around Noah's fingers. "Yes," he said. "And of what people around him would do." Noah leaned forward suddenly and wrapped both arms around his neck. The movement was awkward, fierce, childishly complete. Elias caught him carefully. One hand at his back, the other cradling his head. "I won't go with him," Noah whispered. Elias shut his eyes. The words should have comforted him. Instead, they broke something open. A child should not have to make declarations of loyalty in a ruined chapel while adults bled in the next room. A child should not have to choose between the parent who raised him and the father whose blood had turned him into a target. "You don't have to decide anything," Elias said into his hair. "Not today. Not because anyone is afraid." In the side room, Adrian heard every word. Mara had warned him not to move while she stitched, then had proceeded to stab the needle through his skin with the emotional tenderness of a debt collector. He deserved worse. The wound was shallow but long. Painful mostly because every breath pulled at it. Adrian had endured far deeper injuries without concern. This one felt different because Noah had seen it, and Elias had noticed. Mara tied the last knot and cut the thread. "You are very quiet for a tyrant," she said. Adrian looked toward the half-open door. Through the gap, he could see only a slice of the nave and the edge of Elias's sleeve around Noah's small shoulders. "I was listening. I noticed." Mara cleaned the needle. "Men like you often do that too late." Adrian accepted the words without reaction. Mara studied him. "Do you want gratitude because you didn't seize the child?" "No." "Good. I wasn't offering any." "I know." She pressed a clean bandage over the stitches with more force than necessary. "Elias nearly died bringing that boy into the world." Adrian's hand, resting on the wooden table, went still. Mara's voice remained level. "He bled through 3 sheets. Fever took him for a day and a half. In the middle of it, he called your name." Adrian looked at her. She met his gaze without fear. "Not because he forgave you. Not because he wanted you. Because pain drags people back to the last place they thought safety might exist, even when that place has already burned them." The room became very quiet. Adrian had imagined many punishments during the years of searching. He had imagined Elias dead, Elias wounded, Elias hating him, Elias looking at him with empty eyes. He had not imagined being told that Elias had called for him while fighting to live. Not out of love untouched by betrayal, but out of the body's oldest confusion between wound and shelter. Mara picked up the bloody cloths. "If you hurt him again, no army you own will keep me from finishing what Lucien failed to do." It should have sounded ridiculous. An old beta physician threatening the head of the Vale family with a basin of bloodied towels in her hands. Adrian bowed his head slightly. "I believe you." Mara paused. For the first time, suspicion gave way to something more difficult assessment. "Do you?" "Yes." "Then start by not making your remorse his responsibility." The words stayed with him after she left. By afternoon, Lucien made his move. It did not come as bullets or knives. Lucien had always preferred cleaner weapons. The first reports arrived through Rowan's network statements released to the family council. Letters sent to rival houses. Carefully phrased, accusations spreading faster than any guard could ride. Elias Wren had hidden the Vale heir for 5 years. Elias Wren had manipulated Adrian through the child. Elias Wren intended to use Noah's bloodline to force recognition, wealth, and rank. By sunset, half the Vale family demanded that Adrian return immediately with the child and submit Elias to formal interrogation. The other half, more cautious, but no less poisonous, suggested a protective separation until matters were clarified. Protective separation. Elias read the message once in the chapel's back room and laughed. The sound was so soft no one else might have recognized it as breaking. Adrian stood near the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. He had refused the chair Mara offered. Rowan waited outside, arguing in a low voice with commanders over a secure line. Noah slept in the next room at last, curled beneath Mara's coat, one hand clutching Elias's sleeve. "They still think in cages," Elias said. Adrian's expression darkened. "They will obey me." Elias looked up. There it was, the old answer. The familiar blade. Power meeting fear by becoming larger than fear. "No," Elias said. "They will obey until you are absent. Until Noah is older. Until someone decides your guilt makes you weak. Then they will find another cage and call it duty." Adrian did not answer. "You asked what you were allowed to do." Elias continued. His voice had steadied into something colder than anger. "Here is one thing. Stop making obedience the only shape your protection can take." The words struck him more deeply than Elias seemed to intend. Adrian looked toward the room where Noah slept. "Then I will answer them publicly. You don't owe me a performance." "No." His gaze returned to Elias. I owe you the truth in the place where I first denied it. Elias's face changed, not softening, not trust, but the slight stillness of someone hearing an old door unlock. The Vale Family Council convened at midnight through a secured projection chamber, its members appearing in cold blue light across the chapel wall. Elder alphas, informal robes. Betas with legal authority. Distant cousins. Allies. Predators wearing concern like ceremonial silk. Their voices filled the abandoned nave, too polished to echo properly. Elias stood near the broken altar, with Noah asleep behind the locked inner door. Mara remained beside him. Arms crossed, Rowan stood near Adrian, ready for violence, even in a room made of light. The eldest counselor spoke first. Master Vale, the situation demands immediate containment. The child must be brought under family protection. Mr. Wren's concealment of the heir raises grave concerns. Adrian did not sit. His face, projected back to them by Rowan's portable system, must have looked as cold as it had in every council chamber before this. For a brief, terrible second, Elias saw the man who had condemned him beneath chandeliers. Then Adrian said, "There is no heir to contain." The council stirred. Noah Wren is Elias's son. Adrian continued, "Any recognition of my blood will occur only with Elias's consent and the child's when he is old enough to understand it." Shock moved through the projections. One counselor snapped, "You cannot be serious." "I am. The bloodline does not belong to an Omega's private judgment." Adrian's pheromone pressure entered the chapel like winter through a shattered door. Even through distance and projection, several council members stiffened. Elias felt it brush the edge of his senses and braced for the old suffocation. It did not come. Adrian held the force away from him. The restraint was so precise, Elias noticed before he wanted to. The bloodline, Adrian said, was endangered because I believed forged evidence. Cast out the person who had protected this family for 3 years, and left him pregnant in a storm. The room went silent. Elias stopped breathing. Adrian did not look at him. Perhaps he knew that if he did, Elias would not bear it. I accused Elias Wren of betrayal before witnesses. Adrian said, I ordered him to kneel. I exiled him without protection. Every consequence that followed began with my failure. No one spoke. Powerful men were rarely honest where honesty cost them rank. The council did not know what to do with confession when it arrived without bargaining. Lucien's projected image appeared late. Forced into the chamber under guard from the detention facility where Adrian had kept him alive for trial, even reduced by imprisonment. He looked composed, thinner, perhaps older, but his eyes remained bright with the conviction of a man who believed every truth could still be arranged into usefulness. How touching, Lucien said. The tyrant discovers guilt and mistakes it for justice. Elias felt Mara shift beside him. Adrian's gaze settled on Lucien. You threatened him. Lucien smiled. You destroyed him. I merely understood which hand would strike hardest. The words crossed the nave and entered Elias without surprise. That was the cruelest part. Not that Lucien had hated him, not even that Adrian had believed him, but that the conspiracy had succeeded because it had relied on an existing wound, Adrian's fear. Elias' silence. The household's willingness to see an Omega's loyalty as disposable. You wanted him gone. Adrian said, I wanted you unburdened. No, Elias said. Every projection turned. His own voice sounded unfamiliar in the chapel. Calm, but no longer careful in the old way. He stepped forward, feeling the chill of the stone through his shoes. You wanted him alone, Elias said. A powerful man without witnesses becomes easy to guide. A lonely one becomes grateful for the person holding the map. Lucien's smile faded slightly. Elias looked at him. Then, at the council, I preserved copies of the port ledgers before I left. Not because I planned blackmail, because I thought if I died, someone might still learn why. Adrian turned then. Elias did not look back. Mara handed Rowan a sealed packet. Rowan fed the documents into the projector, one by one altered shipping routes. Private payments. Lucien's correspondence with rival brokers. The forged access trail. The note threatening the unborn child. Preserved beneath wax and salt because Elias had known paper could be destroyed, but evidence could be taught to survive. The council chamber erupted. Lucien's face hardened. An Omega fabricating fear after years of hiding a child hardly proves. Enough, Adrian said. But Elias raised a hand. Adrian stopped. That, more than anything, silenced the room. Elias faced Lucien fully. You are right about one thing. Fear can be useful after the fact. People reshape it to look innocent. So I will not ask them to believe my fear. He took the final paper from Mara. My physician's record from the night I collapsed. He said. Time-stamped. Witnessed. It documents the bruising. Fever. Threatened miscarriage. And the note found in my coat. The word miscarriage passed through the room like a blade through cloth. Adrian's face went colorless. He had known danger in theory. Hearing the clinical shape of it was something else. The child had almost died before Adrian knew he existed. Elias had almost lost Noah on a road outside the estate while Adrian stood in a hall full of broken glass and fading scent. Lucien finally looked away. It was the first true defeat on his face. The council dissolved into emergency motions, accusations, and desperate attempts to distance themselves from Lucien. Rowan handled the legal proceedings. Mara took the papers back with hands that shook only after no one was looking. Elias remained standing until the projections vanished. Then his knees weakened. Adrian moved, then stopped himself so abruptly, pain flashed across his face from the stitched wound. He lowered himself instead, slowly, to one knee several steps away, not demanding, not pleading, not performing for anyone. Elias, he said. The name trembled at the edge of the ruined nave. Elias looked at him through exhaustion so deep the room blurred. What? Adrian's hands remained open on his knees, empty, visible. Will you allow me to stay nearby until the danger passes? Noah stirred behind the inner door, murmuring in sleep. Elias closed his eyes. 5 years ago, he had wanted Adrian to believe him. Tonight, Adrian had done more than believe. He had placed his own guilt where the whole family could see it. It did not heal the wound. It did not return the nights Elias had spent listening for footsteps that never came. It did not make trust grow where fear had taken root. But it changed the shape of the silence between them. Elias opened his eyes. He did not say yes. He did not tell Adrian to leave. The rain stopped before morning. But no one inside the ruined chapel slept as though peace had arrived. Fog clung to the cemetery stones beyond the broken windows, turning every grave into a pale shape half remembered by the earth. Rowan's guards moved quietly along the outer wall. Mara boiled water over a small iron stove and pretended not to watch the door every time the wind shifted. Noah slept curled against Elias's side in the back room. One hand fisted around the edge of Elias's sleeve as if even dreams required proof that his world had not been taken. Adrian remained in the nave. He sat on a warped bench beneath the collapsed roof, his stitched wound pulling with every breath, the damp cold sinking through his coat. He could have ordered a fire, a proper guard post, a medical bed, a sealed carriage. He ordered none of it. For the first time in his life, restraint was not a tactic. It was the only apology he had been allowed to make. At dawn, Rowan entered with the final documents. Lucien's confession did not come from remorse. Men like him rarely gave anyone the satisfaction. It came from arithmetic. Confronted with Elias's preserved records, the assistant's testimony, the forged archive trail, and the recovered threat note, Lucien chose to trade names for a narrower punishment. His allies fell from him one by one, not because they discovered morality, but because survival moved faster than loyalty when power changed direction. The council has voted to strip him of every advisory right, Rowan said. The criminal tribunal will take the rest. His properties are frozen. His correspondence exposes 3 rival houses and 2 family elders. Adrian accepted the report without opening it. Rowan's mouth tightened. You should read it. I will. When? When Elias is safe enough that paper matters again. Rowan looked toward the back room. His expression, usually blunt as a weapon, softened by a fraction. He may never believe safety is something you can give. Adrian's gaze lowered to his hands. 5 years ago, those hands had taken Elias's access seal and called it judgment. Last night, Noah had looked at the blood on them and said blood was important. A child had understood what Adrian had spent half his life refusing to learn. Then I will stop offering it as if it is mine to give, he said. By noon, the Vale family council gathered again. Not through projection this time, but in the old northern hall of the estate. Adrian returned alone. Elias did not come with him. Noah remained in Nerith with Mara, and Rowan's most trusted people watched the roads under Elias's conditions, not Adrian's commands. The hall looked smaller than Adrian remembered. Perhaps nothing had changed. The black marble still shone beneath the chandeliers. The family crest still hung above the central steps. Elders still arranged themselves by rank, every posture polished by generations of ownership. Yet Adrian walked through them and felt no awe, no belonging, no instinctive answer to the weight of inheritance. He saw only the place where Elias had kneeled. The council expected punishment. They expected blood, exile, confiscation, public declarations of control. They expected the alpha they had shaped so carefully, the tyrant who could turn fear into law. Adrian gave them something else. I am stepping down from absolute authority over the Vale family, he said. The silence that followed was more violent than shouting. An elder rose first, face dark with disbelief. You would fracture the house over an Omega's grievance. Adrian looked at him. No, I am fracturing the system that made his grievance possible. Voices erupted. Accusations flew beneath the chandelier light. Weakness, madness, manipulation, an alpha unmanned by guilt. Adrian listened until the hall exhausted itself against his silence. Then he placed the signed transfer documents on the table. Rowan would assume military command under council oversight. Financial control would be divided. Household law would be revised to remove inherited authority over unbonded partners and children. No child, regardless of bloodline, could be claimed without the consent of the parent who raised them, and later, the child himself. The elders stared at the papers as though they were written in fire. Elias Wren did not ask for this. Adrian said, that is why it is necessary. He left before they could decide whether to call it surrender or war. Outside, the estate garden had begun to thaw. Rainwater clung to the bare branches. The windows of Elias's old room stood dark above the east wing, no longer locked. Adrian looked up once, then continued walking. He did not enter that room again until 3 weeks later. Elias came because Mara needed access to the Vale medical archives, and because Noah, after pretending not to care for 2 full days, finally asked whether the mansion had a library. Adrian sent no carriage with a crest. He sent Rowan in a plain vehicle and waited at the outer gate instead of the front steps. Noah noticed. "Why are you outside?" the boy asked, peering up at him with open suspicion. Adrian glanced at Elias before answering. "Because guests should be met before they enter." Noah considered this. "Are we guests?" Elias's hand rested lightly on the boy's shoulder. "For now." Adrian accepted the correction. For now. The mansion received them awkwardly, like a guilty animal lowering its head. Servants, who had once avoided Elias's eyes, now bowed too deeply. Elias hated it. Adrian saw the tension gather in his shoulders and dismissed half the household before lunch, leaving only those Elias had named as tolerable. It was a small act, too small to deserve gratitude. Elias gave none, which Adrian found easier to bear than politeness. Noah, however, liked the library. He liked it with the solemn devotion of a child discovering that the world contained rooms built for questions. He sat cross-legged on the carpet beneath shelves twice his height, turning pages carefully while Adrian stood 3 steps away and tried not to look as if he had been granted something sacred. After half an hour, Noah held up a book. "This one is too high." Adrian did not move immediately. He looked at Elias. Elias looked back. Permission was not spoken. It entered the room quietly. Adrian took the book down and placed it in Noah's hands without touching him. Noah frowned. "You can sit." Adrian sat on the floor. Elias turned toward the window so neither of them would see his face. Days became visits. Visits became meals that ended less quickly. Noah began leaving questions for Adrian in folded paper boats because spoken ones embarrassed him. Adrian answered every one, even the ridiculous ones, in neat handwriting. "Can alphas smell lies?" "No, but many pretend they can." "Can you fight 10 men?" "Not if your father is watching. He would disapprove of the mess." "Why did you make Papa sad?" "Because I was afraid and cruel, and I believed the wrong people. That was my fault, not his." Elias found that answer one evening tucked inside a history book. He read it by the window while Noah slept with his cheek pressed to an open page. Adrian stood near the door, waiting for judgment without asking for it. "You didn't soften it." Elias said, "No." "He is 5. He asked. Elias folded the paper slowly. "Yes, he does that." There should have been more to say. There was always more. Yet silence no longer arrived between them as a locked gate. Sometimes it was simply a place to stand without being struck. Spring entered the estate with hesitant green. Elias did not move back. Not officially. He kept the rooms in Nareth, kept Mara's clinic running, kept his own accounts separate. But some weeks, Noah's lessons were easier in the Vale Library. Some nights, rain made the roads unsafe. Some mornings, Elias woke in the east guest room and found tea outside the door, never placed by servants, always exactly warm enough to drink. Adrian never asked him to stay. That became the reason Elias sometimes did. The old bedroom was the last room to change. Elias entered it alone one afternoon while Noah practiced letters downstairs. The scarf still lay folded over the chair, preserved under a cloth. The desk had been repaired. The floorboard where he had hidden the letter remained unsealed. Adrian stood outside the doorway and did not cross the threshold. "I should have cleared it," he said. "No." Elias touched the edge of the desk. Dust did not rise. Someone had cleaned here often, carefully, without rearranging anything. You should have left it exactly as it was. "I did." Elias looked at him then. Adrian's face was not less severe than before. Time had not made him gentle in any easy way, but the violence of certainty had left him. In its place was something quieter and more difficult, attention without demand. "I hated this room," Elias said. Adrian's gaze lowered. "I know." "No, you don't." Elias looked toward the bed, the window, the chair where the scarf waited, like a question left unanswered for years. I hated that I missed it. Adrian closed his eyes. The confession did not absolve him. It did not invite comfort. It was simply a truth placed between them without ornament. I missed the person I thought I was here. Elias said, useful, necessary, loved. Perhaps, if I never asked directly enough to be refused. Adrian's voice came rough. You were loved. Elias did not move. Adrian's hand tightened once at his side, then loosened. He did not step closer. Badly, cowardly, in ways that harmed you, but you were. For a long time. Rain tapped softly against the window. Elias breathed in. Cedar and frost lingered faintly in the corridor, held carefully back. Beneath it, the room carried another scent now. One Adrian had not noticed returning until this moment. White tea, after rain. No longer fading. No longer trapped in old fabric. Present. Living. Elias looked away first. Noah wants dinner early. Adrian bowed his head. I'll tell the kitchen. And Adrian. He stopped. Elias's hand rested on the back of the chair, near the blue scarf but not touching it. You may come in. Adrian entered the room as if stepping across a frozen river. He did not reach for Elias. Elias did not reach for him. They stood together beside the window while rain darkened the garden outside, close enough that their reflections shared the same pane of glass, far enough that choice remained visible between them. Years later, Noah would remember that spring as the season the mansion learned how to make noise. Not grand noise, not celebration. Smaller things. Mara scolding guards in the corridor. Rowan teaching him how to hold a practice blade and then losing deliberately with no dignity. Elias laughing once into his tea when Adrian burned porridge after insisting recipes were only another form of strategic instruction. Footsteps returning at dusk. Doors left half open. A child running through halls that had forgotten children could run. Elias never became what the Vale family wanted to name him. Not consort, not possession, not redeemed Omega restored to his Alpha's side like a lost ornament. He remained Elias Wren, and sometimes Elian Rue when he returned to Nareth, and always Noah's father before anything else. Adrian learned the discipline of not asking for more than was given. It was the hardest command he had ever obeyed. One evening after rain, they stood in the garden where the cypress trees had begun to grow new tips of green. Noah slept inside after reading himself into exhaustion. The windows glowed warmly behind them. The air smelled of wet earth, tea, and the faint cedar trace Adrian could never fully hide. Elias shivered once. Adrian noticed. Of course, he always noticed. This time, he said only, "Are you cold?" Elias looked at him for a long moment. Then he allowed Adrian to drape his coat over his shoulders. No promise was spoken. No wound vanished. The past remained where it was, a scar beneath weather, tender when touched by certain memories. But Elias did not step away. Inside the house, Noah turned in his sleep, safe beneath a roof that no longer belonged to fear. Outside, beneath the rain-washed trees, the scent that had once faded from an empty room lingered in the open air by choice.